to On the Shelf, episode 3 in this series of video casts, podcasts, whatever we call them, where I take you through my bookshelves. Now this would seem very self-indulgent, wouldn't it? And it probably is, because I do enjoy doing it, so I am indulging myself. But people asked for me to do this, or some people asked me to do this, so I think it's a great thing to do. I love books. Books are kind of, food for the soul and food for the mind and all that kind of thing. So this is this week's rather gorgeous collection of books, and this is what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to just grab a little bit of text from each one of these, tell you a little bit about it, be completely transparent as to whether I've actually read them or not, because some of these books on my shelf I haven't read because they sit in my anti-library. Have a look at episode 1 for that, and that'll tell you what that's all about. But I'll just take you through them, tell you why I bought them, and tell you what's going on. So without further ado, because you haven't got time to sit here listening to me witter on. The first one that I come to is The Doctor and the Soul, From Psychotherapy to Logotherapy by Dr. Viktor Frankl. Now, Viktor Frankl, you might remember from a previous episode, because he wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning, about his time in prison of war camps. He was a Jewish psychiatrist who was in the prison of war camps, and he explored what he observed there, considering what it was that meant some people could manage in some way, tolerate, I don't know what the right word is for that, but manage in some way the horror of that place, and they could keep on going with it. They could remain as positive as they could in those circumstances, while others couldn't. And he wrote other books, and this is one of them. Let me find some of my underlines and what have you. I haven't read all of this yet, and this is a book that I've just been tiptoeing into, but there's some interesting things that he says. So when's he writing this? Let's check that out, that's important. He's writing this in 1952. It was translated into English in 1955, further translation 1965. Very interesting. So here we go, and I've only read the early part of the book, so I can only tell you about that. It's one of my ongoing books at the moment. And he says, another psychiatrist, he says, complains that nowadays too many patients come to the medical man with problems which should really be put to a priest. I think that's quite interesting. Remember, this is the time when religion was probably more prevalent in more people's lives, and I think what he's saying there is people, and we've seen this in the rise of medication for common mental health problems, if that's the right phrase. People go to medical interventions when really what they need are talking therapies, is what I believe he's saying there. I think that's what he's predicting when he says that. And he says a really interesting thing. He talks about the pleasure principle from psychoanalysis, and the pleasure principle, he says, might be termed the will to pleasure. So we direct our will towards pleasure. He says there's a status drive, which is equivalent of will to power. We dedicate our will to creating power, status. And then he says his version, new addition to that, which he says is the crux of happiness, is the will to meaning. We direct our attention towards meaning, and in that meaning we find some sort of happiness. And I really like another quote, which really resonated with me. And he says, I've said that man should not ask what he may expect from life, but should rather understand that life expects something from him. And that reminded me of the JFK thing about ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And I think that's the same sort of thing, isn't it? Ask not what you should be expecting from life, but what can you offer life? And I think that's where you find your meaning. This is a very important book. And he says, and it's 4 words, and I think it's absolutely brilliant. He says it in the next paragraph after that statement. He says, life is a task. And it absolutely is. Life is a task. It's a thing to organise and structure and to work at and to work through. I think that's hugely important in terms of thinking about our mental well-being. We have no right to anything. We have no right to things like happiness or whatever. We have no right to that. We have to work at it. I think it was Viktor Frankl that said that happiness was something you work towards. It's not something that you just have. So yeah, it's a brilliant. I mean, and that's just from the first, 30 pages or whatever I've read of it. So. And the next one, and I haven't read this, and I bought this in Oxfam for $1.99. If you like books, the Oxfam bookshops are great to go to, particularly if you go to them in university cities. There tends to be a lot of old textbooks and old kind of very informative texts in those places. So I think that's important, I suppose, to kind of to remember. Oxfam, great source of books. And actually, I've been in Edinburgh for the weekend with my friend Gareth, and I bought a couple of books in the local Oxfam shop. Here, this is a Daniel Goleman book. Daniel Goleman is the kind of the father of emotional intelligence, or that idea. We looked in a previous one of these at his book Emotional Intelligence, Why It Matters More Than IQ, and this is about social intelligence. And I can't tell you anything about it because I haven't read it. But once you get one book by an author, it's a slippery slope to the depths of buying them all. Daniel Goleman explores an emerging new science. Is it new science? Let's have a look. When was this one written? This was written in 2006, so reasonably contemporary. Explores an emerging new science with startling implications for our interpersonal world. He explains the surprising accuracy of first impressions, the basis of charisma and emotional power, the complexity of sexual attraction, and how we detect lies. That's going to be interesting when I get to that, isn't it? I actually bought another Daniel Goleman book at the weekend, so when I get through the ones I'm reading, I might have a Daniel Goleman fest, because the other book, Emotional Intelligence, Why It Matters More Than IQ, was a book that I really want to return to. And this was, for me, a clutch of books that started my journey into exploring the being organised, the pillars of resilience, all that kind of stuff. And this life-changing book in terms of those kind of things, those kind of, how do we figure out how to navigate our way through this information overload of a world, and that's what it says on the cover. Daniel Levitin, The Organised Mind. Brilliant book. I now read books that reference this book. That's how good this book is. Written in 2014, so it's not that old. Let's have a dip into this. Let's try this one. He talks about flow. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's, and I still don't know whether I'm pronouncing that right. His book on flow, which I'm sure we'll come across on the shelves if we haven't already. It'll be there somewhere. We'll come across it when we get to it. Again, subject-defining book. He talks about flow, this state of flow, where we're in the zone to the exclusion of everything else, founded on mastery, autonomy, and purpose, or connectedness. Yeah, there's a couple of variations as the ideas developed. He says this: during flow, 2 key regions of the brain deactivate. So when you're in a state of flow, 2 key regions of the brain deactivate. The portion of the prefrontal cortex responsible for self-criticism, and the amygdala, the brain's fear center. So if we can get ourselves into this state of flow, our brain deactivates the bit that fuels self-criticism and the bit that fuels fear. So when we can get into this state, we can get into our deep work and get more done. Defining book, really is. What else have we got here? We've got a few. We've got Rumi. These will be quick. Well, they might not be. Rumi, R-U-M-I. Selected poems. I thought I might have done this one in the previous one. Anyway, if I have, I have. If I haven't. 13th century Persian philosopher, mystic, scholar, and founder of the Order of the Whirling Dervishes. You might have heard of them. He was a poet of transcendental power. It's great. Let's have a look. Let's have a read of some of these. So are these poems or kind of wise words or whatever? So I'm just going to read some of them, and you have to reflect on them and think. So here we go. Why do you stay in prison when the door is so wide open? Plato's Cave, isn't it? Why do you stay in prison when the door is wide open? Some of you might like this one. God has put into the form of hashish a power to deliver the taster from self-consciousness. Your call on that one. Every object, every being is a jar full of delight. These are great. Some of these are so uplifting. They're just marvellous to dip into and have a read. And I love this one. I use this one in a session that I do with social workers on communication. There is a way between voice and presence where information flows. In disciplined silence it opens. With wandering talk it closes. There is a way between voice and presence where information flows. In disciplined silence it opens, and with wandering talk it closes. And I will reflect on this one tonight. No more wine for me. I am past to delighting in the thick red and the clear white. I'll let you know how I get on with that. And then here we are, one of my favourite authors from a group of authors from the 50s and right in the 50s and 60s called the Angry Young Men. And this is one guy, Alan Sillitoe. Saturday night and Sunday morning, this one. I remember watching a film of this. This is a real fond and happy memory for me. I remember watching a film of this, and I was at my grandma's, and I'm talking when I was a teenager, and I was at my grandma's, and this very kitchen sink drama, socially real film came on the television. It was this film, and I've never been able to find the film since. This film came on, and I was watching it, and I was just rapt by it, because it was just real people living real lives, their ordinary lives brought out on screen, and that's probably quite a normal thing for us to see now, I suppose. There are many films like that. I love Alan Sillitoe as an author, and there are other books on my shelf. One of my favourite books ever, one of my favourite short stories, was written by Alan Sillitoe. And I don't underline much in works of fiction, but I have underlined something in here. And this is the protagonist in the story says, "Be careful, and you won't go far wrong." Sound words. Be careful, and you won't go far wrong. And then finally, we've got two Irving Goffman books. His classic Asylums. It's just one you should have on your bookshelf, and the other one, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. Now then, I'll be honest with you, I have not read these cover to cover, but I have dipped into them on many occasions for preparing lectures and kind of working through things, and I have kind of, it's one of those ones where you can read chapters. In fact, this one, Asylums, is 4 essays, so you can dip into those about closed communities, landmark study. Really worth having on your shelves. It's a classic, and I think it's often good to have contemporary books on your shelves, but it's good to have classics on there as well. First published in 1961, and as a study, it thinks about. I used it a lot in a lecture that I prepared on care homes as institutions, because he's writing about institutions, and obviously care homes aren't. He talks a lot about mental hospitals, and they're not mental hospitals, they're very different. But he talks about total systems, I think is the phrase he uses, if I've got that right. It's a long time since I looked at this. Where people are overseen at all times, without freedom to come and go and move about, that kind of thing. So a real kind of landmark book, and really, I would say, for anybody who is interested in the social world, maybe an important one to have and dip into. And obviously he writes a lot about that, and here's his other book, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, and I've got lots underlined in this one, and again a really important book to read. He talks about the personal front. He talks a lot about being the actor. He talks about appearance and manner, being important, and these things are defined for us. Let me find that quote about that. It's a really important one. Here we are. I think this is it. When an actor takes on an established social role, usually he finds that a particular front has already been established for it. So, me as the actor, I take on the established role, let's say, of YouTuber, of person on YouTube. I'm sure I call myself a YouTuber, but you know what I mean. I find that actually there's a particular front particular presentation that's already been established for it. And it's interesting because I do these on here, and I've also started doing some little edited things on TikTok, or shorter versions on TikTok of things. And I've immediately gone into a different kind of approach, much more. I find on here when I'm doing this, it's much more laid back, it's much more relaxed. And on TikTok, because I know it's a particular sort of platform, I find I'm just a bit more excitable, you know. And so there's that, isn't there? But there's also kind of, when I take on the role of lecturer, there's a particular front already established for that. We expect things to go on in different ways, don't we? So there's another one. There's another Goffman book for you. We have a vocabulary of fronts. I think the other thing that Goffman talks about is this idea of doing face work. It's one of the phrases that I really like, because we do face work because our face kind of explains a lot to people about kind of what else is going on behind the scenes. So important as well, the face work we go on. So there you go. There's the books we've got. I'll list them in a slide at the end. But The Doctor and the Soul, Viktor Frankl; Social Intelligence, Daniel Goleman; Daniel Levitin, The Organised Mind; Rumi, Selected Poems; Saturday Night, Sunday Morning, Alan Sillitoe; and Irving Goffman's Asylums, and The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. Grab some of them if you can. Go to Oxfam, great source of books, and cheap books, second-hand books. And we'll see you again next time and find out what's on the shelf.